Welcome to Energy Unplugged, the go-to podcast focusing on the global energy transition. My name is Barillas, and I'm Aurora's Managing Director for Iberia and LATAM. Today's episode is being recorded in a completely different setting. Instead of us sitting behind a computer screen, we are all actually sitting together at the LevelTen Energy Forum in front of a live audience of about 120 people in the beautiful Círculo de Bellas Artes in Madrid. I had the pleasure of joining the session today, and in its second year, once again, it has been an insightful exchange of ideas related to renewable energy procurement, project development, financing, and sustainability. So, what better way to end the day than interviewing two thought leaders in the space? Let me introduce my guests. So first, we have Flemming Sørensen, Vice President of LevelTen in Europe. Flemming set up the European branch of LevelTen in 2020 in Madrid. We also have Ángel Sanz. He is a member of the Global Executive Committee of ENGIE's Energy Management Unit. Flemming, Ángel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Anna.
So let's start with a few questions so that everyone that's listening gets to know the companies. So Flemming, you chose Madrid as the headquarters of LevelTen in 2020. That's 4 years ago. That's a lifetime in the energy industry. How do you think kind of LevelTen's role has changed in that space of time? And how do you think the PPA market has changed in that time?
Great. LevelTen's involvement in the space, I think, is primarily centered around our shift from being an advisor ourselves to actually working with advisors on PPA transactions. We needed to be an advisor initially to demonstrate that the products and tools that we had built added value to the procurement process on the corporate side. We've moved away from that, and now we service, I think around 50 partnerships between North America and Europe among consultants and advisories that help service their clients by the use of the infrastructure tools that we have built. So we find that that's a much better place for LevelTen in the space. It serves our purpose of becoming infrastructure. The PPA market itself has evolved, but I'll be honest, it hasn't evolved tremendously. Right? Some of the products that we're seeing offered are the same that I saw offered when I first started looking at PPAs back in 2015. There has been some product development, but to be honest, not a great deal. One of the things we focus on is try to help innovate, and granted, we're also not the fastest in the world, but the LEAP concept that was mentioned before is an evidence of some of the innovation we try to bring to market to standardize the contracts to help reduce transaction time. PPA auctions is another type of product that we have brought to market recently that is providing sellers with another opportunity to take charge of the process of selling the power from some of their projects. So we'll continue to innovate. I mean, you'll see our name in relation to 24/7 stuff. You might see our names shortly, as Linda also mentioned earlier today, in the hydrogen space. So we'll continue to look for ways to provide efficiency and transparency and liquidity into these markets so that they can function better, so that the audience can get better deals done faster. That's what we aim to help with.
Fantastic. And Ángel, our listeners know who ENGIE is. It's one of the largest, most diversified and international energy companies in the world. I think that's fair to say. But what they may not know is the role that ENGIE plays in the PPA market. So can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like?
Absolutely. So if you want, I would say ENGIE plays a role on 3 different capacities, if you want. So first, within ENGIE, I'm in the energy management markets part. And we're at the middle, if you want, on the PPA chain. So we play a role with off-takers or downstream players. And if you want on that, I think ENGIE it was ranked number 1 by BNEF, Bloomberg New Energy Finance, in terms of volumes 2023, around 20 teras. And then upstream, we enable PPAs for third-party developers, so outside of the ENGIE group. And of course, we enable the development of our own group, so ENGIE development of renewable assets, which is quite large. Again, it's like 40 gigawatts globally already. So I would say the 3 capacities.
So you play a pretty critical role in that. More broadly, I guess, how critical do you think PPAs are to the energy transition and to where we need to get to in terms of kind of climate goals?
Yeah, and if you want, I think I'm very much like go to the top and then zoom down. So energy transition is on many fields, like molecules, so on and so forth. But electricity, that is like what we're focused here today, and it was the first one to crack. Like we all know, it was CFDs in the past and still in many markets globally, because we're used to Europe here and where we have like liberalized markets most places. But where you have a liberalized market, PPA is critical. As we know in terms of, say, not only offtake of energy, but securing revenues for project finance and so on and so forth. So I would say, Flemming, to your point, like we've seen the industry, I've been doing PPAs like more than 20 years. By fluke, I started doing this like 2002. And we've seen it taking it off, as you say, maybe not so much the last few years, but it's really critical, I think, in the energy transition.
So, one of the things I think, so maybe some of the structures haven't changed and some of the things remain the same, I guess. But one of the things we have seen change in the last 18 months is crisis. And, we saw a presentation earlier today kind of highlighting that. And one important thing I wanted to ask about this is, given the scale of the change in prices, how risky do you think it is? So how likely is it to see price reopeners, for example, or renegotiation of PPAs in the current environment that we have? Is that something that we're seeing? Is that something that we think may happen? What are some of the protections in place, I guess, in contracts to limit that?
Yeah, I guess I can start. I understand the question, and I don't think we're going to see a lot of that. I hope we won't see a lot of that. But is there a risk? Sure. Like most of the companies that still engage in long-term PPAs are IG-rated companies with long-term commitments to sustainability and accountability towards their shareholders, and they will hopefully and most likely manage short-term being underwater from a pricing perspective. But is there a risk that some companies might try to open up that conversation? Sure. If we talk about sort of between term sheet and signed PPA, I think the risk is much greater that we'll see some buyers run away, just like we saw some sellers run away, a year and a half ago. There's a looser connection there. I think post signing, sure, we might get the questions. The developers won't like it, and I think most buyers will do what they can to stay away from that.
What's your view, Ángel?
Yes, I would say quite aligned. I say, in these circumstances, when you realize how important it is to have a standard or good legal negotiation, and I think I'm surprised, what we've seen 2020, 2022, that what was signed before generally stayed. So to me, those are almost like a stress test. So I would say it's rare, as you say, Flemming, before signature, yes, but once it's signed, I think people is both rating and also reputation. People generally, defend their reputation.
Yeah, and I don't want to sort of chew on the LEAP topic a lot, but one good thing to kill it, or one thing that often kills a good deal is time.
Yes.
Right. So if you negotiate over the course of 8 to 12 months or longer, there's a reasonably likelihood the prices will change. Whereas if you can get the deal done fast, right, and in LEAP text, that means a couple of months. Then the risk of signing something that you were, that you're not comfortable with is much reduced.
So we heard about LEAP earlier today, but I'm conscious that our listeners may not have. So in kind of 5 words, Flemming, what's LEAP?
LevelTen Energy's accelerated process, which basically mean a fixed language standard PPA that's attached to an RFP process where there is limited but some flexibility for sellers to on the areas that are of key commercial importance to them, but for the rest of the contract consider it sort of fixed language, and there's time to review it before they actually make the decision whether they want to participate in the procurement or not. And but if they do, there's a commitment from them to adhere to these 5 areas of negotiation, and there's a commitment from the buyer to actually sign the projects that come in, within a few weeks after they have received the offers.
Okay, yeah, that should help clarify the link between that and the risk of kind of negotiations falling through if it takes too long.
Yeah.
One other thing that I've seen in the context of Spain specifically, but I think more broadly across Europe, is an increasing kind of concern about curtailment and how curtailment is factored into PPAs. And by that, I don't mean necessarily just the kind of economic curtailment, price is zero or below zero that was mentioned earlier today, but grid curtailment and kind of the nuances behind, say, kind of pay as produced or pay as nominated and kind of where the risk lies. So, Ángel, I don't know whether you have any views as to kind of what that's doing in terms of kind of negotiation and risk.
Everyone, I would say, is a hot topic at the moment, particularly, I think maybe another maybe more advanced market or more advanced off-takers. They had it in mind like from years ago. I'm thinking about the Nordics or like the big tech companies, if you want. But I think, say, if you want, like 5-6 years ago, some off-takers or even developers, they were happy, more focused on price, and that's it. And I think now you learn as you experience, like, if you want, complexities or difficulties. And we're seeing a lot more attention on those clauses, I would say, and I like your view later, Flemming, but I would say the feedback we get, like from counterparties, there's not a market standard. We have a way of doing it and try to find something fair and balanced. But we hear, look, everybody has different ways of doing it. So I think it's a point very topical. It will get more and more important as we have more renewables. And I think there's not a market standard at the moment, but it has to be covered.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you agree, Flemming.
Yeah, I think I agree fully with that. And we're not seeing everybody sticking in specific language into their PPAs on that, but we are seeing a few companies that are doing it. So it is a hot topic, probably is a good description as this problem rolls out into more and more markets where curtailment becomes a real issue.
Fantastic. And then, another and final question on this, and then this is your warning to the audience. Prepare your questions if you have any. We saw a graph earlier today around kind of the different PPA pricing levels across Europe. Spain is one of the lowest priced kind of countries. There's a lot of kind of fundamentals and background behind that. But I think it's fair to say probably one of the drivers is simply demand and supply. It's a marketing where there's a nexus of supply compared to demand. So it doesn't just apply to Spain, but I guess the question is, where do we see the biggest sources of demand for PPAs coming? Again, not just Spain, all of Europe, but what's your sense? Kind of what are we missing in terms of demand upsides over the next kind of 5-10 years? Flemming.
I can start, and then Ángel can say something completely different. But obviously, we got to mention data centers. It's difficult to open a newspaper that doesn't talk about how AR demand is driving up data center volumes through the roof, and whether that's there's how big that demand rise will be is difficult for me to say, but because there are also great minds at work trying to mitigate that even on the chip side to produce more energy intensive chips. But the point is they will be a demand driver across Europe. I mean, we've seen 3 at least of the major players in announcing huge investments in different European countries. Mm-hmm. Amazon last week with I think 15 billion euros in northern Spain. So yeah, that's coming. There's a lot of talk as well about hydrogen. I think that will become a demand driver. When is maybe a better question, and others in the room may have a better answer to that. But when I read those articles right now, it's more like it's too expensive. So at some point, and certainly there are very strong European targets also for the adoption of green hydrogen into industry. So let's see how that evolves. General sort of electrification of industrial processes, I'm hopeful for will take more speed in the next 5 years, and also deliver a stronger electricity demand and move some of that away from fossil fuels in the near term or near to mid term. Yeah.
And if you want, I'm surprised it looks like we coordinated before because very aligned again. And if you want, the data centers topic is really hot topic. It's coming on every earnings call of the large utilities. I think it's significant, big investments. But if you want at the global level, it's going to be a few percentage points increase on total demand, going faster in the US than in Europe, and it will be very local in countries. And long term, as you say, Flemming, like hopefully one day green hydrogen comes or electrification, but I think that's several years away. So at the moment, lots of hopes and attention on data center because it's where the big deals are. But
exactly.
But I think it won't be huge in terms of takeoff.
Okay. I mean, if you believe in economics, the fact that kind of Spain has the lowest kind of prices, should incentivize further demand.
Yes.
But let's see how things pan out. Fantastic. Any questions from the audience?
Baldwin Hesse, Frontier Renewables. Obviously, inflation is a hot topic these days. Just wondering how that's impacting PPA negotiations. I think Flemming, earlier you mentioned that some of those escalators are coming back. So just was wondering how that's impacting structures, who's wearing the risk, and yeah.
I'll be honest, I didn't quite hear the first part of your question.
Inflation.
So inflation is obviously on everybody's mind at the moment, at least in the finance world, and I was just wondering how that's impacting PPA negotiations, structures, who's wearing the risk.
So maybe Flemming, would you want to take that?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. We have seen the re-emergence of a couple of themes over the past, maybe this year, right, over the past 4 to 6 months. One is sort of an escalator attached to a fixed price. We still see the predominant payment structure being a fixed price PPA, but the emergence of an escalator in there to help mitigate some of that inflation risk is clearly coming back. There's another pricing structure that I think Candela mentioned in her presentation earlier, the market following pricing structure where the buyer agrees to set a floor, then he pays the following the market price, and sometimes with a discount to that price in order to add the floor. That is also a structure that I think we're seeing more and more again. That was sort of both pre-crisis and in some cases during crisis was a theme. Then it was quiet for a while, but I think it's coming back again. So those are two areas where the two parties are trying to find a way to get around that question around inflation.
Any other questions?
Good afternoon. I'm Álvaro Manso from Arup. We always, the market, comment that PPAs help avoiding that price volatility in the market and stabilizing prices for generators. I'd like to know your opinion on how will PPAs develop once the energy storage technology comes more into action, and because it's supposed that storage is going to help that market price stabilization. So if you think that PPAs are going to continue to be so demanded as they are nowadays for project financing when storage comes into play, or you think it's going to maybe replace one another?
Ángel, if you
So
want.
I can take a stab at that one. If you want, I think more than competing, they are complementary in the sense that there are many off-takers. We see more and more, and I think one of our panelists before said they want almost like guaranteed delivery, matching their profile. So if you want, you cannot do that just with PPA of a renewable asset. You need to complement with a storage asset. In some cases, that's the demand from the off-taker. So I think, and somebody said before, I think it's right, it's just in its infancy. We're just in storage being added as a plug-in to PPAs. But I think potentially it's going to match better the needs of some corporate off-takers, I think. I don't know if you agree, Flemming.
I think I agree with that, yeah.
Perfect. So we have a bit of a tradition in Energy Unplugged to finish with an underrated, overrated kind of question. I think it's a good way of summarizing the discussion, actually. So I will give you a topic, and then the question is it underrated or overrated in the context of PPAs? And if you want to say one or two words, that's fine. Green hydrogen as a demand driver, underrated or overrated? Ángel.
I would say, I hope long-term correctly rated, and short-term maybe overrated.
Yeah, and I think I agree. I alluded to that in my previous comments. I think expectations are very high for the adoption of green hydrogen in a short term where the cost picture looks a little challenging. So I would call it overrated as well.
Excellent. Batteries as a way to firm baseload or shape PPAs. Overrated or underrated? Ángel.
I would say geography specific.
Okay.
Like in some countries, say Northwest Europe, or Texas, probably adequately rated. In other countries, underrated. I would say I expect more.
Yeah, I would say in most countries overrated, at least at this particular point in time. We've heard from the panel earlier that there's still so many challenges on sort of stacking up the revenue side of the business case for storage, and I think that means that this is a little bit further out in time.
Fantastic. So I will end it there. Thank you for joining us in this episode of Energy Unplugged. Thank you to the LevelTen team for inviting me to host the episode from this beautiful venue. But most importantly, thank you to our wonderful guests.
No, thank you.
Thank you,
Flemming,
Anna.
Ángel,
Thank
it's been
you,
a
Anna.
pleasure.
Thank you so much. Anna.
Real pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was Ana Barillas, Aurora's Managing Director for Iberia and LATAM, talking to Ángel Sanz, member of the Global Executive Committee of ENGIE's Energy Management Unit, and Flemming Sørensen, Vice President of LevelTen in Europe. The conversation was held at the LevelTen Energy Conference in Madrid. Thanks for listening to Energy Unplugged. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to follow or subscribe to the podcast via whatever platform you use.